My father kicked me out for wanting to be a programmer. I worked washing dishes and as a night guard for years. But now I came back and bought his house. I turned them into my tenants and tripled their rent. I'm 28 years old. I run my own tech company. And what I'm about to tell you probably sounds like one of those revenge stories you see in movies. But I swear every word is true. 6 years ago, my life completely changed. And it all started with a shitty conversation with my parents at the dining room table in the house where I grew up. I guess I should start there, when I still believed my parents would support me no matter what. I was 22 and in my second year of college, studying business administration because that's what my father, Richard, had decided for me since I can remember. My mother, Patricia, always agreed with him on everything. She was basically like his human echo. My father had this obsession with me becoming a successful executive, expensive suit, office on a high floor, that kind of thing. The problem is, I hated every second of those business classes. I spent my time daydreaming while the professor talked about mergers and acquisitions, and that really excited me was when I got to my room and could sit in front of my laptop to code. I'd been teaching myself programming for like a year, watching YouTube tutorials, taking free online courses. And honestly, I was good at it. I don't know, it just made sense to me in a way that business never did. I could spend hours writing code without getting bored, solving problems, building things. My girlfriend Sophia, we'd been dating for like a year and a half at that point, always told me she'd never seen me as happy as when I was programming, and she was right. So I decided it was time to talk to my parents about switching majors. I thought maybe they'd understand, that they'd see. This was what I was really passionate about, and that there was a future in the tech industry. God, I was so naive. I remember that night perfectly. It was a Sunday. We were having roast chicken or something, and my stomach was in knots because I knew I was about to drop the bomb. My father was in a good mood, talking about some deal he'd closed that week, and I thought, well, now or never. So I just said it. Dad, Mom, I need to talk to you about something important. I want to switch my major from business administration to computer science. The silence that followed was one of those awkward ones you physically feel. You know? My father put his fork down on the plate, very slowly, and looked at me with that face he made when he was about to lose his patience but was still trying to maintain composure. My mother just stared at me, waiting for my father to react first like she always did. Computer science? My father said, and I could hear the disdain in his voice. For what? To end up being a nerd who works in a cubicle writing code all day? Marcus, we're paying for your education so you can be someone important, not so you can sit in front of a computer like some tech guy. I tried to explain that technology was the future, that programmers made good money, that there were tons of opportunities, but he didn't want to hear any of it. My mother joined in, saying they'd invested a lot of money in my education and had already planned my future, that I should be grateful for the opportunities they were giving me. The conversation escalated quickly, with my father yelling at me that I was ungrateful and throwing my life away on a whim. And then he said something I'll never forget. He said, "If you're going to waste your life this way, you won't do it under my roof or with my money. Either you keep studying business like we planned, or you leave this house and figure it out on your own. You have 24 hours to decide." I sat there, completely in shock, waiting for my mother to say something, to defend her son, but she just nodded and added that maybe a little real life would make me mature and realize how wrong I was. I couldn't believe it. I literally couldn't process that my own parents were kicking me out of the house for wanting to study something different. That night, I called Sophia crying, which is embarrassing to admit, but that's how it was. She came over and we stayed up until 3 in the morning talking about what to do. I also called my best friend Derek, who'd been my friend since high school, and without hesitation he told me I could stay at his apartment as long as I needed. He had a small place, like 40 minutes from the university, but it was better than nothing. The next 24 hours were surreal. I kept waiting for my parents to reconsider, to say they'd overreacted, but it didn't happen. My father didn't even speak to me. My mother passed by my room once while I was packing and just said she hoped I learned my lesson. I stuffed all my clothes into 2 large suitcases, grabbed my laptop, some books, and that was it. 22 years of my life in that house reduced to 2 suitcases. Derek was incredible, honestly. His apartment was tiny, basically a studio, but he shared his space without complaining once. I slept on the couch while he had the bed, though he offered to take turns all the time. Sophia was also there constantly, bringing me food, helping me look for work, just being huge emotional support. The problem was that without my parents' financial support, I couldn't afford university. I tried to apply for student loans, but the process was complicated and long, and I needed money now. So, I had to make the hardest decision of my life up to that point and drop out of college. It was like a punch to the gut, because I'd worked hard to get there, but there was simply no way to continue without money. I got a job at a restaurant called Sunnyside Diner, one of those places that never closes and where they basically hire anyone. They put me cooking burgers and washing dishes for minimum wage. I think it was like $7 and something an hour. The manager, a guy named Harold who was like 50 and had been working there for like 20 years, was decent to me. He gave me all the shifts I could handle, which I appreciated, even though it meant working like 50 hours a week. But here's the thing. Even working full-time at the restaurant, I could barely afford my share of rent and food. Derek didn't charge me much, but I didn't want to abuse his generosity, and besides, I had my own expenses. So, I got a second job as a night security guard at an office building. It was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 nights a week. Basically, my schedule was crazy. I worked at the restaurant from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., slept a few hours, and then went to the security job. I'm not going to lie, those months were the hardest of my life. I was exhausted all the time, living basically on coffee and restaurant food they let me take home. Sophia stayed with me, which still surprises me because honestly, I was a mess at that time. She was still in college, her parents supported her financially, but she spent all her free time with me, helping me not go crazy. There were days where I literally thought about calling my parents and telling them they were right, that I'd go back to studying business, whatever, as long as I didn't have to live like this. But something inside me refused to give them that satisfaction. Besides, I kept programming in my free time, which wasn't much, but I made the most of it. During my security shifts, when there was nothing to do, I'd take out my laptop and practice code. Things started to change like 6 months after moving in with Derek. There was a regular customer at the restaurant, a guy named Brandon who came every morning for coffee and waffles. He was always friendly to me, left good tips, that kind of person. One day he saw me with my laptop during my break. I was working on a personal project, and he came over to ask what I was doing. I explained that I was teaching myself programming, that I'd had to drop out of university but was still studying in my spare time. Brandon asked me a bunch of questions about what I could do, what languages I knew, that kind of thing. Turned out he worked in human resources for an IT startup, a small company that was growing and needed people. He told me they were looking for someone for an entry-level position, basically tech support and minor tasks, but that it could be an opportunity to learn more about the industry. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it literally seemed too good to be true. Brandon gave me his card and told me to send him my resume, that even though I didn't have a formal degree, my portfolio of personal projects might be enough. I spent that whole night fixing my resume and portfolio, asking Sophia to review everything like 1,000 times. The interview was 2 weeks later. I was super nervous. I'd bought a cheap shirt at a thrift store because I didn't have professional clothes. I met Rebecca, who was the IT department manager, a woman around 35 who seemed super serious but turned out to be pretty cool. She asked me technical questions. Some I answered, well, others I totally screwed up. And honestly, I thought there was no chance they'd hire me. But Brandon had spoken well of me, and I think Rebecca saw something in me that was worth it. They called me 3 days later to offer me the job. The salary wasn't amazing, like $15 an hour, but it was double what I was making at the restaurant. They gave me a normal Monday to Friday 9 to 5 schedule, which sounded like a luxury after my chaotic hours. I accepted immediately and gave Harold my resignation at the restaurant. He was happy for me, honestly. He told me he always knew I was destined for better things than flipping burgers. I kept working as a security guard for a while, because I needed the extra money and because I didn't want to risk having just one job in case things didn't work out. The first months at the company were intense. Basically, I was learning everything on the fly, asking tons of questions, staying late to study, and better understand the systems. Rebecca noticed my dedication and started giving me more complex projects, tasks they normally wouldn't give someone in my position. I took them all, no matter how difficult they were, because I knew this was my chance to prove what I could do. Like 6 months after starting, they offered me a full-time position with fixed salary instead of hourly. It was like $45,000 a year, which might not sound like much, but for me, at that moment, it was a fortune. I was finally able to quit the night security job, start sleeping like a normal person, and I could even move into my own small apartment. Derek was happy for me, though I think he missed having me there. We'd become even closer during those months. The real opportunity came like a year and a half later. The company had landed a big client, a medium-sized company that needed a complete restructuring of their IT system. It was a huge project, and Rebecca put me as team leader, which surprised me because there were people with more experience. She told me she trusted me, that she'd seen how I worked, and knew I could handle it. That project almost killed me. I'm not going to lie. I worked like 70 hours a week for 3 months, but we did it. We not only met the deadline, but the client was so impressed, they recommended us to other companies. Rebecca gave me a significant raise and a bonus and started talking about a possible promotion to manager in the future. But here's the thing. While all this was happening, I hadn't had any contact with my parents. Not a call, not a message, nothing. At first, I tried to reach out a couple times, mainly through text messages, but my mother responded with short, cold things, and my father directly ignored me. Eventually, I stopped trying. Sophia told me maybe they needed time, that maybe someday they'd reconsider. But I'd already started accepting that they'd basically erased me from their lives. The weird thing is that hurt me, but it also motivated me. Every time I had an achievement at work, every time I solved a difficult problem or completed a successful project, I thought about my parents and how they'd told me I was throwing my life away. That drove me to work harder, to prove they were wrong. And fast forward like 2 years. By that point, I was 26 and had learned a ton about the industry. Rebecca had been an incredible mentor, but I felt I'd hit a ceiling at that company. I started having this idea of starting my own consulting business. It was risky, obviously, but I had some clients who knew me from my previous work and who'd expressed interest in hiring me independently. Sophia, who by then had graduated and was working in marketing, completely supported me. Derek, too. He'd always believed in me. I quit my job, which was difficult because I owed Rebecca a lot, but she understood and told me I could always count on her as a reference. I started my company with my savings, which weren't much, but enough to begin. The first 6 months were terrifying. There were weeks where I didn't know if I'd have enough work to pay my bills. But little by little, I started getting more clients, building a reputation. I hired my first employee after the first year, then another, and another. By the time I turned 28, my company had 15 employees, and we were billing like 7 figures a year. I can't explain how it felt. I went from literally having nowhere to live to running a successful company in just 6 years. Sophia and I had gotten engaged by then. We were planning the wedding. Derek was working with me at the company. I'd offered him a position because without him, I never would have survived those first difficult months. Everything was going incredibly well. And then something happened that I didn't expect. I was browsing the internet one day, looking for I don't know what, and by chance I saw that my parents' house was for sale. I recognized it immediately in the listing photos. I felt something weird in my chest, like a mixture of nostalgia and bitterness. I read the description and saw they were asking like $450,000, which was reasonable for that area. I don't know what went through my head, but I started thinking about buying it. I had the money, my company was doing well, and I'd saved quite a bit. The idea of owning the house where I grew up, the house they kicked me out of, had something poetic about it, you know? I talked to Sophia about this, and she thought it was crazy. She asked me why I'd want to do that, but she also said she'd support me in whatever I decided. I hired a lawyer and a real estate agent and made an offer through them without revealing my identity. I used my company name for the transaction, kept everything super professional and distant. The offer was accepted without problems. My parents probably didn't even see my name on any documents. The closing process took like a month and a half. During all that time, I couldn't help thinking about what I'd do once I was officially the owner. Part of me wanted to just sell it and forget about everything. But another part, the part that was still angry about everything that had happened, wanted them to know what I'd achieved despite them. The day we signed the final papers, I decided it was time to visit them. I hadn't warned them. I just showed up at the house. My house, technically, on a Saturday afternoon. I rang the doorbell, and my mother opened the door. The expression on her face when she saw me was total shock. "Marcus," she said, and stood there not knowing what to do. My father appeared behind her and asked who it was. When he saw me, his face became hard, that cold expression I knew so well. "What do you want?" he said, without any trace of warmth. Not even a, "How are you after 6 years?" I told them we needed to talk, and they reluctantly let me in. The house looked different, emptier, as if they'd already packed some things. We sat in the living room, that same place where we'd had family dinners so many times, and the atmosphere was uncomfortably tense. My father started by saying I hoped I'd learned my lesson, that I was probably there to apologize and ask them for help. The arrogance in his voice made my blood boil. My mother nodded, saying they'd always known I'd come back. When real life hit me, I let them talk. I let them assume whatever they wanted, and then I dropped the bomb on them. I told them I wasn't there to apologize or ask for help. I told them I'd built a successful IET company, that I was making more money than they'd probably imagined, and that I'd bought their house. The silence that followed was delicious. I'm not going to lie. My father looked at me as if I'd spoken to him in another language. My mother asked what I meant by I'd bought their house. I explained that the transaction had closed that same week, that I was now officially the property owner, and that they were technically now my tenants. My father turned red. I could see the veins in his neck. He started yelling that it was impossible, that it couldn't be true, that it was some kind of cruel joke. I took out the documents my lawyer had prepared for me and showed them. Everything was there, legal and official. I told them they'd misjudged my decision to study computer science, that they'd kicked me out of the house for following my passion, and that now that same passion had led me to be their landlord. The irony was almost too perfect. My mother started crying, saying we were family. How could I do this to them? And there's the thing, that word, family. I laughed. I couldn't help it. I told them they'd ended any concept of family 6 years ago when they gave me 24 hours to get out of their lives. Then I gave them the options. They could stay as tenants, but I was going to triple the rent to market price, because let's be honest, if they were going to live on my property, they were going to pay fair value. Or they could look for another place to live. I gave them 30 days to decide. Exactly 30 days more than they gave me. My father tried to negotiate. Of course, he tried to appeal that we were blood, that he'd raised me, that I owed him something. I reminded him of every hurtful word he'd said to me, every time they belittled my decision, how they left me practically on the street. I told him I didn't owe him anything, that everything I'd achieved I got despite them, not thanks to them. I left that house without looking back. My hands were shaking as I drove back to my apartment, a mixture of adrenaline, rage, and something I can't describe well. Sophia was waiting for me and just hugged me without saying anything. She knew I needed it. That happened like 3 months ago. My parents decided to stay and pay the increased rent. I guess they didn't have many options. We haven't talked since that day beyond the necessary communications about the property, which I handle through my property manager because honestly, I don't want to deal with them directly. People ask me if I feel good about what I did, if it wasn't too harsh or vindictive. The truth is I don't know. Part of me feels like it was justice, that I finally showed them they were wrong about me and about my decisions. Another part feels empty, like I won a battle but lost something bigger in the process. Sophia tells me I'll eventually need to process all this in a healthier way, maybe even consider some kind of therapy. Derek thinks I did the right thing, that my parents needed to learn a lesson about how they treat people. Rebecca, who I still keep in touch with, told me she understood my anger, but to be careful not to let bitterness consume me. What I do know is this. Every time I pass by that house now, I don't feel nostalgia or sadness. I feel something like satisfaction mixed with a weird sadness that doesn't go away. I proved I could be successful following my own path. I proved my father was completely wrong about me. But at the same time, I didn't get a family back. I just gained a property and a sense of victory that doesn't feel as sweet as I thought it would. B. Sophia and I are getting married next year. Derek is my best man. My company keeps growing. Life is good, objectively speaking. But there are moments, usually late at night when I can't sleep, where I wonder how things would have been if my parents had supported me from the beginning. If we would have reached this point of success together, celebrating it as a family, instead of being in this cold war where I'm their landlord and their resentful tenants. I guess I'll never know. The only thing I have is this version of the story, where I had to lose everything to gain something, where I had to prove my point so hard that I ended up literally buying my childhood home just to show them they were wrong. It's a victory, yes, but it feels more complicated than that. It feels like having won a war, but having lost something I can't name exactly, something I'll probably never recover, no matter how much money I make or how much success I have. And that's it, I guess. That's my story of how I went from being kicked out of my house at 22 to owning that same house 6 years later. I don't know if it's inspiring or sad or something in between. I just know it's my life, and I have to live with the decisions I made, just like my parents have to live with theirs.